Donald Trump's dark past continues to surface as MeidasTouch host Katie Phang smokes him out and smokes out his DOJ's cover-up of the Epstein files. In the latest DOJ filing, in response to Katie Phang's lawsuit for the release of the Epstein files, where a federal judge ordered Todd Blanche to turn over certain documents that Todd Blanche is claiming to be privileged and that are redacted and are being withheld from the public, Todd Blanche was forced to make a stunning admission that he was improperly redacting the email address and information of Jeffrey Epstein from one of the documents being withheld that Katie Phang was calling out specifically to try to determine if information was being improperly redacted. I'll show you in a moment in the filing what Todd Blanche was forced to admit only after Katie Phang cornered him. Also another massive finding after the latest DOJ filing that Katie Phang was able to expose. So a lot of the redactions of individuals who the Trump regime and the Trump regime DOJ are claiming are victims, are people who are co-conspirators or potential targets who could potentially be investigated, or individuals whose lawyers are simply going to the DOJ and saying, we believe our client is a victim, even if they were on a co-conspirator list. And so the DOJ is saying, well, if you tell us that you are a victim, even if you're a co-conspirator, we now treat you like a victim. Think about the ultimate insult to the actual victims and survivors, that people who are likely identified as the co-conspirators, as the perpetrators, as the bad actors, or the people who were involved in doing potentially really horrific things with Jeffrey Epstein, that their lawyers right now are apparently going to the DOJ under a loophole exception that Trump created for them and that Blanche created for them, it seems. And they could just say, well, we're victims too. And if they utter the magic words, we're victims, they get redacted and removed. It's admitted right here in the filing. So just to give you the quick sequence of events, Katie Phang sues Todd Blanche, released the Epstein files. She wins a preliminary injunction in DC federal court. The judge orders Blanche to turn over a certain group of categories of the Epstein files that are subject to Katie Phang's preliminary injunction. Blanche refuses to do it. Katie Phang says, hold Blanche in contempt, and judge, why don't you do what's called an in-camera review? Review this group of documents. It doesn't have to be everyone. Let's just take a look at this group of documents, a smaller sample, and see if there are any red flags with the smaller sample. The federal judge, Judge Sullivan, granted that request by Katie Phang, said, okay, let me take a look at this smaller group of documents in camera so I could determine if they're red flags. Turn it over by, I think it was like close of business on Friday. Blanche did the he filed something called a notice of compliance. But even though the filing by the DOJ says notice of compliance, that's, they lie about everything. It actually was an admission of non-compliance with the Epstein Transparency Act. Look at this. Defendant's notice of compliance with court order. And it says, defendant Todd Blanche in his official capacity as acting attorney general, by and through counsel, submits this notice of compliance. And then it says, defendant submitted hard copies to the court's chamber. So the federal judge reviews it in camera, meaning Katie Phang and the DOJ are not there with the judge. The judge reviews it privately and confidentially alone for now. Blanche says the submitted documents show that the justification in defendant's briefing on this issue supports each redaction. Each file listed in the court's order is addressed below. So take a look at number 2. It lists one of the Bates number documents, EFTA 011879999. The in-camera documents show that the redacted text contains the identity as a victim, contains the identity of a victim as that term is defined in the memorandum titled Attorney Review Protocol for Epstein Files dated January 4th, 2026. Specifically, this individual is represented by counsel with whom the Department of Justice has communicated, and that counsel has requested the individual be treated as a victim. Upon closer evaluation of this document, it was also discovered there was an inadvertent redaction to Epstein's email address, which has since been lifted. Now, this is just a small subset of the documents. It's like 8 documents. And on one of those that Katie Phang says are suspicious, what the DOJ is claiming now is that they've created a memorandum titled Attorney Review Protocol for Epstein Files. So the DOJ creates their own memorandum and then says that pursuant to their own memo, we redacted the name of this individual because their lawyer contacted us and said that the co-conspirator or the individual identified here was actually a victim. So we said, sure, if you tell us he's a victim, we'll now say that he or she, they're a victim because you say so, and now we won't turn it over. So just think about it. If you're part of Trump's Epstein class crew, if you're part of that Mar-a-Lago crew, what do you do right now? Well, you just say you're victim. And it's the ultimate insult to the real victims and the survivors. You know, just think about it. Blanche, hey, just go reach out to Blanche and just say you're a victim and we'll redact you. So think about throughout the files, the potentially tens of thousands of other references to victims who are not actually the victims, but who are the co-conspirators who, just think about it, the real victims and survivors, they had their names leaked. They had their private information leaked. They had photos of themselves, compromising, horrific photos of themselves leaked by the DOJ to traumatize them. Whereas the co-conspirators, whereas the perpetrators, whereas the bad actors, they then go to Blanche. Do you see what Katie Phang exposed? They go to Blanche and they say, actually, we are the real victims. And then the DOJ gives them a pass and says, okay, we're going to redact your name and we're going to protect you. How utterly horrific, how utterly horrible right there, right? And then you go through it over here too, and it says, upon closer evaluation of this document, it was also discovered there was an inadvertent redaction to Epstein's email address, which has since been lifted. You were redacting Epstein's emails and Epstein's email address, and it just so happens in this group of 8 documents, one of them have those 2 issues. Is this the biggest red flag? Great work by Katie Phang to expose this stuff. And that's what they say about these other documents. We redacted the name of co-conspirator X, Y, and Z because their lawyer contacted us and said they're a victim. So we said, okay, you're a victim. We're going to hide your name because the memorandum that the DOJ created apparently back in January 4th, 2026, created the pretext for them to follow their own BS memorandum. Are you freaking kidding me? Let me just show you what Katie Phang has to say, how she is undeterred and she is going to get to the bottom of this. Here's what Katie Phang said. Let's play it.
Where's the redaction log? Where are the foreign language translations? And where are the handwritten FBI interview notes for those 4 interviews that were done of the victim who was 13 years old when she alleged that she was abused sexually and physically by convicted felon Donald Trump? Where are those? Still remain open. I am still forging ahead. But again, look how far we have made it. Look how far we have come. This is just a preliminary injunction, people. This is not even my entire lawsuit, which seeks all of the files to be released with appropriate redactions. We are chipping away at the opaque, just bullshit block of this black box that the DOJ thinks is okay, but it's not because it's illegal. And we're not going to take it.
Here's how Katie Phang describes Todd Blanche admitting in his filing yesterday that Epstein's email address was redacted. Let's play it.
I want to go back to 1187999. This is the Mademoiselle Model Agency one. And the reason why I want to go back to this one is there's something very important that happened with this email. Todd Blanche admitted in his filing yesterday that Jeffrey Epstein's email address was redacted. He calls it an inadvertent redaction, but it's been redacted and has since been lifted. Now, you may not think that's a big deal, But I think it's a very, very, very big deal. And in fact, that is the biggest red flag that you could find from what has happened here. Putting aside all the other stuff. Why? Because it shows that the way that the redactions were done here was wrong. This wasn't some one-off mistake. We know for a fact that the Department of Justice released over and over again, hundreds and hundreds of times, the personal identifying information of several victims. Victims whose names had been submitted on a list to the DOJ. People like Danny Bensky. We know that the process was flawed. We know that it didn't work. And now we know that it also worked to protect the identity of Jeffrey Epstein, the main perpetrator of these crimes that we are focusing on right now. And the DOJs want to say, oops, sorry, we missed it. There's something flawed with the process. And that is what a special master needs to get to the bottom of. Because this, folks, is just a small subset of the millions of documents that have been publicly released, in addition to those that are being squat on by Todd Blanche.
Now I want to bring in Katie Phang as well to discuss what's been going on in her case against Todd Blanche. Katie Phang, an American hero. It's such an honor to have her be a part of the MeidasTouch network. Let me just show you what Katie Phang had to say about this. Let's bring in Katie Phang.
Todd Blanche, the acting attorney general of the United States, produced to federal judge Emmett Sullivan in the district court in D.C., produced unredacted emails and documents for purposes of a in-camera or an in-chambers review. I'm not allowed to be there. It's something for the judge to be able to do on his own. It is pursuant to an order that was entered on July 25th, 2026 that we've covered here at Katie Phang News. This order was specific, about the bait stamp documents that were to be submitted, and accompanying those unredacted bait stamp documents, Todd Blanche was to provide documentation supporting his representations that the redactions that were done were compliant with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. That's really an important, nuanced kind of detail that we're going to talk about in just a minute. Because as we sit here right now, Friday, July 31st, 2026, Todd Blanche continues to violate the Epstein Files Transparency Act. I also want to say at the get-go the following. There's been some, I'll call it chatter, on social media and beyond, maybe internet, that I am doing something that's running afoul of protecting the confidentiality and the privacy of, frankly, any abuse survivor, but specifically survivors of Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and others. It is one of the most offensive suggestions to make to me or about me. If you've done so, you don't know me. If you've done so, you haven't been following my work. This is not the pursuit of money on my behalf. This is not the pursuit of anything but the ability to achieve accountability and justice. I spent a good portion of my career as a lawyer, as a prosecutor. I believe in the rule of law. I believe in our judicial system. I have made that explicitly clear from day one here, not only at Katie Phang News, but even before when I was at MSNBC, and before then when I was doing legal analysis, and before then, and even now as I am presently a member of the Florida Bar and other jurisdictions. I'm very serious about the work that I am doing. I have no desire to abuse, exploit, or do anything to harm any survivor or victim. So the idea that I am pursuing that in any way is, for lack of a better word, bullshit. So if you hear it, put it to bed. Help me tamp it down. Because if you know me, you know it's not about me. Alrighty, so let's talk about the notice of compliance that was filed yesterday on July 30th. It cites that hand delivery was made of the ordered documents at 2:28 p.m. Eastern on July 30th. And according to Todd Blanche's representations, the submitted documents show that the justifications that were cited in his briefing, and what is he referencing? He's referencing this, his response to the order to show cause. Blanche says that the submitted documents show that those justifications cited in this document support each redaction. Let's take a minute. What is still not produced? The redaction log that the Epstein Files Transparency Act requires by law for the Attorney General to submit, in addition to the summary of redactions and withholds that Todd Blanche seems to think covers all bases. He's wrong on the law. Judge Sullivan granted the redaction log as a part of my preliminary injunction. And as we sit here today on July 31st, still no redaction log. Remember that. But thank you, Todd, for laboring so fucking hard, okay, to support each redaction with an explanation, like you were supposed to do for all of the redactions. But okay. Now, let's start with the first document, EFTA 00749-245. I want to do this with you. I think it's important to go through these emails. This is the I loved the torture video email. This is the email that Todd Blanche wanted to say that if I had just Googled it, I would have found out that it's Sultan bin Sulayem. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. I don't have to trust Todd Blanche. I don't even have to trust Tom Massey's word for it. I don't have to trust anybody's word for it. I get to see the unredacted email. As I've said before, there is no trust me, bro exemption in the Epstein Files Transparency Act that gives Todd Blanche cover to continuously violate not only the law, but Judge Sullivan's order. Now, the email address and name remain redacted. This was provided to Judge Sullivan yesterday unredacted, with the name and the email address unredacted. What does Todd say? Todd says that the in-camera documents show that the redacted text contains only emails address that are consistent with the government's briefing. That's not even English, number one. It's grammatically wrong. But number two, his briefing, as I've said, says that when it pertains to the torture video email, as we are calling this, he says, well, it's a private email address and there's no purpose beyond sharing that private email address. Oh, I beg to differ, Todd. The email is to show, one, a potential perpetrator of crimes against the survivors of Epstein, Maxwell, and others. Two, I'm not supposed to give quarter to somebody who loves torture videos. Let me be clear. Todd Blanche, by insisting on maintaining the redaction of the sender of this email about their love of torture videos, Todd Blanche, as the acting Attorney General of the United States, is saying that if you love torture videos, that you have a safe space with him. And by extension, the Trump Department of Justice. I want you to sit on that for a hot second, because that is one of the most offensive things that anyone could say, let alone somebody who wants to be the top cop of our country. But Todd wants to spare the exposure of a private email address for somebody who loves torture videos. Why, Todd? Because the Epstein Files Transparency Act explicitly states you are not allowed to do redactions or withholdings to spare somebody embarrassment, shame, or any type of political humiliation. And yet Todd seems to think that that is a priority. So that's this email. Next, EFTA 1187999. That is email chain dated January 17th, 2013, from somebody working at the Mademoiselle agency, which, again, if you go and you Google, that is a modeling agency in Paris, France. According to Todd Blanche, the names that have been redacted and email addresses are victims that are represented by counsel. Now, why is this one so important? EFTA 1187999. Well, Blanche says that the victims in this email are represented by counsel and have requested that the individuals whose names and email addresses appear in this particular document, that they want to be, quote, treated as a victim, end quote. Todd also references something called an attorney review protocol for Epstein files dated January 4th, 2026. Let's take 1 minute to go over that because that's a very important thing that we should talk about. So this memorandum is dated January 4th, 2026. I'm going to do an entirely separate episode about this memorandum because it's worth detailing. But I want to highlight in this memorandum, the subject heading is Attorney Review Protocol for Epstein Files. What Todd Blanche has done in order to, for example, protect the name and email address of the torture video lover, and in order to also protect the names and the email addresses of the people in the Mademoiselle modeling agency email is the following. So in this memorandum, what he did was he said that victims' personal identifying information includes email addresses. Okay, fine. That's okay. But if you go to the beginning of the protocol, he says that what they're defining as victims now is not just victims that have been identified through investigations, but individuals who have identified themselves as victims or potential victims, either through prosecutions of Epstein and Maxwell, as well as all individuals who have self-identified, as well as those that have been identified and that have reported to the Department of Justice as being potential victims of state or federal offenses or other claims of sexual exploitation or misconduct by Epstein or Maxwell. So what Todd Blanche has done has taken a non-existent definition of victim and expanded it to include victims, potential victims, and people that arguably were co-conspirators, co-defendants, and co-perpetrators of abuse to allow them to self-identify as victims. As such, their identities have been redacted. I think it merits a conversation, and I want to be able to talk about it. In the interest of time, I do think we should probably talk about it at another time, but I wanted you to understand why this information will continue to remain redacted based upon how the victims have been identified in the withholding and redactions here. So that's for EFTA 1187999. Now let's move on. Let's go to EFTA 1930501. Again, according to Todd Blanche, the sender of this email is a victim represented by counsel, and that counsel has requested that the individual be treated as a victim, and that's why that information is not unredacted. EFTA 1928255. Now, that is another email where within it, the redacted text are the identities of victims, plural, who are represented by counsel, and they have requested that these individuals be treated as victims. Now, this one is the long, soft blonde hair, beautiful little girl one, and the one before, the 1930501, my apologies that I didn't address this. This is the your littlest girl was a little naughty. Now, this is why there is already a conversation about whether it is appropriate to allow those names of people that were helping, allegedly, Jeffrey Epstein and others to be able to recruit, to groom, to be able to participate in these offenses, whether it is okay to allow them to have their identities remain unredacted. Again, redacted. Again, conversation for another time, but I want you to understand the context of what is happening here. EFTA 628112. Now, this is another one that really upsets me. This is the email dated February 2nd, 2015, sent from a redacted sender that talks about being called a sexual pervert is no fun. The key are the 14 to 15-year-old girls. I am a sexual pervert because I say that they are now of reproductive age. According to Todd Blanche, the Privacy Act allows this person's identity to remain confidential. And according to the Attorney Review Protocol for Epstein files, Todd Blanche said that the Privacy Act allows identities of people like this person, their email addresses, to remain confidential. So once again, the acting attorney general of the United States wants somebody who thinks it is okay to have sex with 14 and 15-year-old girls because they are, quote, now of reproductive age. He wants this person's identity to remain confidential from you because he wants to keep their private email address not released. Why, Todd? Why are you protecting this person? They're not a victim. But according to you, it would be a shame that their private email address be exposed. I think it's a shame if you don't expose somebody who thinks that it's okay to have sex with a 14 and 15-year-old girl. Alrighty. EFTA 264-8868. Again, Todd Blanche says that the redacted text, this is the "she is like Lolita from Nabokov. Tomorrow we traveled to Bern for visas." Visas for what? Modeling? Modeling visas? May 23rd, 2017, this person is represented by counsel and claims that this person is a victim, and that's why their identity is redacted. EFTA 250-4630. March 19th, 2018, sender is redacted. I found at least 3 very good young poor, but we was so tired. The sender is a victim represented by counsel. I will cover up this week. Meet this one, not the beauty queen, but we both likes her a lot. Is this a recruiting email? Is this somebody who is out working for Epstein trying to find other victims? Is that what's happening here? Let's go to EFTA now. 102-2356. Email chain dated September 21st, 2018. According to Todd Blanche, the names and the email addresses pertain to 2 victims. The recipient of the email is a potential victim, and the name in the email that is redacted is the potential victim, talking about my favorite from Lithuania, redacted 19, will meet when I am there. Again, according to Todd Blanche, because they are represented by counsel or potential victims, their names are not going to be unredacted. But what are they doing for Jeffrey Epstein is the question. Moving on. EFTA 000-38227. Now, this is another one. The email addresses, sender and recipient, these are law enforcement personnel. And according to Todd Blanche, you should be protecting the identity of law enforcement personnel. Again, that is not in the Epstein Files Transparency Act, but that is in this attorney protocol that the DOJ generated. Why are you protecting the names of government employees? Why? Why is that? What's also not addressed here is that the redactions that are here that are identified as co-conspirators, their names are redacted. But Ghislaine Maxwell and Leslie Groff, their names are not. And according to Todd, in his response to the order to show cause, Leslie Groff has not asked to be identified as a victim, and that's why her name is made available. And EFTA 194840, I didn't print it out. It is the draft indictment that was prepared by the U.S. Attorney's Office, Southern District of Florida. And the one that was never presented, and the one that eventually was what resulted, the non-prosecution agreement that benefited Jeffrey Epstein and his co-conspirators, and then he got that bullshit sweetheart plea deal. Yeah. That one, according to Todd Blanche, shows that the co-defendants are actually represented by counsel who have asked that the co-defendants be treated as victims. Again, having issues. But I want to go back to 1187999. This is the Mademoiselle Model Agency one. And the reason why I want to go back to this one is there's something very important that happened with this email. Todd Blanche admitted in his filing yesterday that Jeffrey Epstein's email address was redacted. He calls it an inadvertent redaction, but it's been redacted and has since been lifted. Now, you may not think that's a big deal, but I think it's a very, very, very big deal. And in fact, that is the biggest red flag that you could find from what has happened here. Putting aside all the other stuff. Why? Because it shows that the way that the redactions were done here was wrong. This wasn't some one-off mistake. We know for a fact that the Department of Justice released over and over again hundreds and hundreds of times the personal identifying information of several victims. Victims whose names had been submitted on a list to the DOJ, people like Danny Bensky. We know that the process was flawed. We know that it didn't work. And now we know that it also worked to protect the identity of Jeffrey Epstein, the main perpetrator of these crimes that we are focusing on right now. And the DOJs want to say, oops, sorry, we missed it. There's something flawed with the process. And that is what a special master needs to get to the bottom of. Because this, folks, is just a small subset of the millions of documents that have been publicly released, in addition to those that are being squat on by Todd Blanche. There is so much more work that needs to be done, but I am thrilled that we have made it this far together. It's now in the hands of Judge Sullivan. He has to review the unredacted stuff, review the supporting documentation that was allegedly provided, because I kind of have an issue with that. The submitted documents show the justifications cited in the defendant's briefing support each redaction. Now, I'm curious. Did Todd also submit the correspondence from the lawyers that are representing the alleged victims to show that they asked to be identified as victims? Because it doesn't say that here. And according to the order from Judge Sullivan, Blanche was supposed to bring with him proof that these redactions were appropriate, not just a, hey, here's an unredacted email, and hey, I'm just letting you know that these people are represented by counsel. And so there's a lot of open-ended questions that still remain, including where's the redaction log, where are the foreign language translations, and where are the handwritten FBI interview notes for those 4 interviews that were done of the victim who was 13 years old when she alleged that she was abused sexually and physically by convicted felon Donald Trump. Where are those? Still remain open. I am still forging ahead. But again, look how far we have made it. Look how far we have come. This is just a preliminary injunction, people. This is not even my entire lawsuit, which seeks all of the files to be released with appropriate redactions. We are chipping away at the opaque, just bullshit block of this black box that the DOJ thinks is okay, but it's not, because it's illegal. And we're not going to take it. So much more to unpack. I'll do more episodes, but in the meantime, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for the support, for the caring, for the words of encouragement. There is nothing that keeps me going more so than knowing that we are in this fight together. And as always, a shout out to my amazing lawyers, Brendan Ballou and Sam Ward-Packer at Public Integrity Project. I couldn't do this without them. Just like I couldn't do this without you. Be mad, be outraged, demand accountability. I'm off to rattle some more Todd Blanche cages.
Hey, if you want the full story, how democracy got here and how we take it back, pre-order our new book, WTF America, today. Just scan the QR code or click the link in the description. Let's do this.